Salete, and welcome to the Sunday, December 6th edition of Virtual Mentoring for Latin Teachers. It's good to have everybody watching, and I hope that many people will be able to join us now. And of course, I know lots of you guys watch us later because it's not an ideal time in your schedule, which I understand. One of the things that we've talked about with this group is finding a time other than the weekend afternoons for groups that want to, or smaller groups that really want to go into some depth on particular topics. We had talked about a number of things back in August and September and early October before sickness and May getting ready to move and more sickness and all the other things that happened that in that crazy time of the year that the Love Teach blog calls the dark evil vortex of late September, October, and November, or Devulsen. Before that all got started, we had really been talking about doing a number of things that I hope we'll be able to get going either later this month or possibly after the first of the year. Um, so, so it's good to be back, though. It's good to be back on a regular schedule. If we have mainly just viewers today, we may cut this a little bit short as we did on Saturday. But I did want to get us back onto that regular kind of a schedule of knowing that if it's a weekend afternoon around 3 o'clock Eastern, excuse me, that there would be some kind of a something where we would be getting together. And our topic this week is celebrating our successes and planning for the future. As I said to the group yesterday, and I'll say it again today, one of the successes to celebrate once it is in fact December is making it through that dark evil vortex time of late September and October and November. If you are a new teacher, you probably don't realize how hard that is to do. And if you're a veteran, you may be so busy surviving it year after year that you haven't really taken time to think about it. But I love that blog because the author really gives a name and a description to something that many of us have experienced. Most of us who teach on kind of the Northern Hemisphere schedule, where school starts in late August or early September, know that there's sort of a happy period, a few weeks at the beginning of the year, and then oftentimes it just gets difficult for a while. And then as September turns to October and October turns to November, it gets harder and harder and harder sometimes, especially if it's a school that's not very self-aware, as many schools aren't, of what's going on. Um, if you don't have a name for it and you don't realize that it's going to happen, or you think, well, that's just a thing that happened last year and the year before and the year before, but it's not a thing that will necessarily always happen. And you don't then start thinking about ways to be proactive about it, then it can just turn into a dark, evil vortex indeed. So to everyone who's watching and everybody who will be watching, who survived that dark, evil vortex, as Love Teach calls it, um, congratulations, because that is a major success. And when you're a new teacher, as I know many of our relatively new teachers, I know many of our audience are, then it's even more of a thing to be celebrated. If it's your first year and you've made it this far, and you're still hanging in there, that is a huge victory and one that should be celebrated. So that's definitely a thing to celebrate. But there are other things to celebrate, no matter, even if you feel like things haven't gone as well as you wanted and all of the ambitious plans that you had at the beginning of the year, not all of them have come to fruition. But I bet some of them have. I bet that there's probably at least one thing that you said you were going to be doing this year. And you may not be doing it as consistently as you wish you could. But there's probably at least that one thing that really feels like, yeah, more often than not, or more often than in the past, my students and I are doing that thing now. I don't know what that thing is for you. Um, I'm thinking about my own students, and as most of you guys know, it's kind of an unusual teaching circumstance because I see them all online, and some of them are school-based. Some of them are at a school in New Jersey that has a contract with us to provide them with Latin instruction, but some of them are with are homeschooled, and some of my homeschoolers have never really been in a class setting at all. So it's very, very different to have this group of kind of high achieving suburban kids in North Jersey on the one hand, and this group of very, very intelligent but very not traditionally schooled at all, um, and rather younger kids all over the country on the other. Multiple groups of them, their numbers have been growing. So one of the things that I've had to learn to do is to let go of the notion of coverage and really embrace the notion of helping students build meaningful language proficiency. When I was a young teacher, I thought that you did that by working through the textbook, whatever the textbook was, at a particular pace, and you finished it with time to review. And I did that for many years, and I had students who were successful with that. But then I realized that it's less about covering this particular point and that particular point than it is about students really coming to be comfortable with what they know, being able to do the things that they need to be able to do. Um, Many of our returning audience know that I'm a big believer in using the actual proficiency scale descriptors with students to show them and help them see where they are in their language learning journey. And so what an area of growth and success for me has been letting go of saying, well, we have to do this, or we have to do this set of we must do this set of readings, and we must do this activity with them, and instead to embrace, here's what my students need right now. Here's how I can use this particular set of readings or that set of readings or something else entirely to help them make the next step. So letting go of a belief in coverage and embracing an alternative to that has been an area where I feel like I've made some successes this year. Um, it hasn't always been easy because I did the coverage thing for a long time, even when in the early days of developing the Trisk Alumni Project materials, I still thought of it as a thing that one would cover. And it really took me a long time to let go of that and realize, no, it's about any language teaching is about helping the student develop his or her proficiency. And that doesn't mean that we have to do things the same way all the time. And it doesn't mean we have to read every story in this book or in this set of materials. And it doesn't mean that we have to always do things the same way. So that's been an area where I feel like I'm finally making some progress, is really getting away from the textbook coverage notion. Um, I don't know where you guys are with that. And for some of us, some of us, that's not even a thing that we can think about yet. There was a wonderful conversation on the Latin best practices email list this week about developing a CI curriculum. And Ellie Arnold, who's a frequent contributor here, had shared a document that she made that's a beautiful document, and it's really about building a set of materials and a set of approaches that you can use to help students make meaningful progress in language. And then a brand new teacher had asked, how do I use this document? And she basically told him, don't use this document. This document is not for the type of questions that you're asking and the type of things that you need to be doing right now. This document isn't something that you should be even concerned with yet. I thought that was very powerful because, of course, when you start doing something and you see that you have success with that, with your students, it's so tempting to think, well, I've found the one and only right way. I need to share this with everybody else. And sometimes you have, but even if you have found the one right way, it's still so important to think about how to share it with people and who's ready to receive it. I don't happen to be much of an advocate of the one right way, especially when it comes to language teaching. I think there are many, many right ways, as long as your students are able, understand more and can do more with the language now than they could in the past, at some point in the past. As long as there's a feeling of growth, then something right is probably happening. excuse me, and you know your students better than anybody else does. So you're really the person who ought to be making those kinds of decisions. I guess that's another area of celebration of success for me that I need to make is becoming less dogmatic about one right way, because I really used to think that there was one, and of course it was what I did. Um, I think we've all been there. Um, so going along with that, one of the celebrations of success that I had yesterday was with all of the groups of students that I work with, that as I let go of those kinds of dogmatic claims to the one right way, that I can start to see how much progress my students are able to make when things really belong to them. I've always said that shared ownership, or students really owning the learning process, is a core value of mine, and I've always believed that, I guess. But living it is hard, and the more that you live it, and the more that you realize, no, it's not about the thing that I thought I was going to do, but it's about the thing that they have showed me that they need. Sometimes it's about them figuring it out. Sometimes it's about us figuring it out together. Sometimes, sometimes it is about us, the teacher, saying, okay, let's try this because this will probably work. But it's always about students really having meaningful ownership and voice and choice in the learning process. And the more that that happens, the more success that you see. So I want to celebrate the things that all of my students, both the ones in the physical classrooms and also the ones in their family's living room or their dining room table around the country, who've been working on that with me throughout this year, have been doing and are able to do now that they weren't able to do before. It's exciting to see that. So celebrating our successes, it's really important to do that. It's important to help students do that and to help them see the kinds of progress that they've been making, because otherwise it's very easy to fall back into thinking, well, this is hard, and it used to be hard, and so I haven't made any progress at all, and not realizing, oh, well, this is hard for me right now, but would have been impossible for me, or a whole lot harder for me a few weeks or months ago. Um, Many of us, I think, believe that students will sort of automatically realize that they've made progress, but oftentimes they don't. I think, especially the way that schools are now and have been for the last 10 or 15 years in the United States, with the focus on standardized test scores, and the standardized test scores seem to students to be kind of disconnected from anything else. So it's hard for a lot of kids to see and realize, oh, I'm better at this than I used to be. Um, and in a subject like learning a language, or in music, or in athletics, or anywhere else where you're really building up a set of skills, it's really important to notice and to take the time and say, I'm better at this than I used to be. And as I continue with this and become more effective and discover even more, you know, and discover other things that I can do to become more effective, then look where I will be. So celebrating our successes actually leads to planning for the future. And one of the things that we talked about yesterday was the power of using a set of questions that Bob Patrick um, proposed and shared a number of years ago in various places, back on the old Latin Teach Listserv, and also on Latin Best Practices. Bob had a list of 4 questions to ask periodically throughout the year. He suggested end of a marking period or beginning of a new one, or right before or right after a holiday, taking some time to engage students in these 3 or 4 powerful questions. Um, and I want to share them with you guys because I've been using them ever since Bob suggested them to me, and I really feel like they have changed so much about what I do. They've led to greater success and more effective planning. because they connect the two. And the first question that Bob would have us consider is, and have students answer, is what have we done in class? What have we done as a class that's been really helpful to you in learning the language? What have we done that's been really helpful? So what Bob does is just, I think, a sheet of paper with 4 sections. And I've done that. And then, of course, with my online students, I've done Google Forms because that's an easier way for me to collect the information. And it's easier for them to get it to me since there's no physical way for somebody in New Jersey to hand me a piece of paper through the internet in North Carolina. But whatever way you go about collecting it, ask your students sometime between now and the holidays, what have we done that, what have we done so far this year? Or what have we done since the beginning of your learning Latin that's been really, really helpful to you? And then look at those answers and see if there are patterns. If everybody in the class says this particular activity is really helpful, then that's a thing that we probably need to keep doing. We might need to do some similar activities or some things that build on that. But if everybody says this is really effective and this really helps me, then that's definitely a thing to look at continuing to do. The second question that Bob asks, and the second question that I've learned to ask, is what have we done that's been really fun, that you've really enjoyed? Um, Often those are the same things as the stuff that's been very helpful. But sometimes asking it that way leads to a whole new set of or different set of activities. Um, Sometimes the thing that's really fun may not have been all that helpful in the short term, but it will be in the long term. Sometimes it's just a thing that we need to do occasionally because it's enjoyable. We need to take that time to enjoy being with each other as a class and doing that one thing that everybody seems to like. So, what's been helpful and what's been fun? So those are kind of the happy questions. Those are the easy ones to ask. The other two are harder to ask, but they're really important to hear the answers to. Question 3 on Bob's list is there anything that just hasn't helped you at all in your learning of Latin that we do? That was a hard question for me to ask the first time. It's still a hard question for me to ask, even though it's just sitting there on a Google form that I can copy and I don't have to look at it until I start looking at the responses. But it's hard because, of course, as the teacher, you want to think that everything that we're doing has got this value, and the students can easily see what the value of it is, and everything's helping everybody. But of course, we also know that that's not true. In any group endeavor, there's probably going to be something that, or one thing, at least for one person, that just really isn't helping them much. And if it's just one person, that's one thing. If you know that there's that one person who's terrified of acting, and so acting type activities just leave them cold. They'll probably say that acting hasn't helped them. Although one time I had a student who was terrified of acting who said that having to get up there and pretend to be a column or whatever other minor character he or she was really, really helpful. Wasn't fun, but was helpful. Um, but sometimes you discover that there's a thing that isn't very helpful. And if it's not helpful for a large group in the class, then maybe that's a thing that we need to rethink. Maybe that's a thing we need to do a lot less of or just not do at all for a while. Um, I had an activity like that for many years that I thought it was great. The first group of students that I used it with thought it was wonderful. But several years later, it wasn't so wonderful anymore. And I told the story yesterday, but for the benefit of folks who are watching today, I guess I can tell it again. Um, it involved finding, 10 or 15 English derivatives of words that had been on the current set of vocabulary and making a silly story that featured them. And it's a wonderful activity for certain groups of students. But Then I discovered with this one particular group that they hated it and that they didn't think it was very helpful. So I wanted to know why. And they said, well, what we do is we think of the most obvious English derivatives that we can. Um, defensible from defender, or amatory from amare. And these are words that we know. And we also know the Latin roots that they come from. And we know how to use them in English. So why are we kind of wasting our time just doing a thing that we are already good at? I had no answer to that question. So for that particular group, we just stopped doing that. And for groups that have that kind of control of English vocabulary and that kind of awareness of what the roots are, and I find that out early enough in the year that I can know, should we spend time making these derivative stories or not. And if we have a good understanding of those and a pretty solid English vocabulary, then no. And if we don't have such an understanding, then we'll build up to that. I also once had a group that had the opposite complaint about it. They said, we don't know how to find the words, and even when we do, we don't know them. So we don't really know how to use them. So it's kind of hard to make a story when you don't know what the words mean and you don't know how to use them. And so there again, I realized, okay, no, this activity doesn't work with this group. So asking what doesn't work, what doesn't help, can be painful, but powerful. And then there's a fourth question that Bob asks. You can ask it a couple of different ways. You can ask, is there anything that we do that's just not fun at all, that's just unpleasant? I mean, I hope there isn't, right? But there could be. Um, Generally, unless you build up a whole lot of trust with students, they won't really give you a lot of feedback to that. But there's another way to word it, or another approach to that, of asking, is there anything that really helps you learn in other areas that we haven't done? Um, and if you ask students that question, sometimes you get really interesting insights. Sometimes, if you're kind of an untraditional teacher, students will ask for kind of traditional things. They'll ask for, a worksheet on such and so, or they'll ask for a structured vocabulary list and a quiz. And then, of course, you can decide, do I do that or not? But if you have a lot of requests for something from students and they say this would help me, um, it's certainly a thing that you can try. I am not a big believer in vocabulary quizzes, as veteran watchers and participants here know. But I had a group the ones that really they thought that was going to help them. So I said, okay, let's try. Let's rather than do the whole thing, let's sort of go halfway towards it. So I'll give you the list, and what I want you to do is I'll have the list at whatever point, but near the end of the chapter or whatever group of stories that pertain to this list of vocabulary, I'm going to ask you to tell me how comfortable you feel with each word. And then I'm going to ask you to focus on words that you rated that you weren't very comfortable with and see if you get more comfortable with them. And, if we need to take a quiz to help you with that, you just let me know and I can do that. Interestingly, that's what that group needed. They did not actually need a quiz. They didn't actually want a quiz, but what they did want was a structured process that was going to bring them back to words that they had been struggling with. They thought the only way to do that was take a vocabulary quiz. So when you ask that question, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you'll implement in the class is exactly what the student said. But again, what you will do is have a conversation with them. And that conversation about, what is it that you need can lead to some powerful results and can help you plan for the future in a way that leverages the successes of the present, and that also takes any things that are problematic about the present, and helps to turn them around and make it better for everybody. And that's really what it's all about, isn't it? It's about becoming more effective with this group of students with what they need right now and with what they will need going forward. So since we're kind of a small group today, and since it's kind of a day and kind of a week for many people, I think we're going to cut things a little bit short. But I wanted to thank everybody for watching, and I wanted particularly to thank everybody who will be watching in the days and weeks ahead, since excuse me, since these are recorded and are there on YouTube forever. Thanks again for being part of this community. Thank you for contributing to the success of it. And I'm hoping that we'll be together around this time next week, at least on Saturday. I may be traveling on Sunday, but we'll see if we can at least have a Saturday and hopefully also a Sunday hangout on the 12th and the 13th. So thanks again to everyone for being here. Thanks again to everyone who has had great ideas. Thanks again, and congratulations again to everybody who survived that dark, evil vortex. And Walete omnes, Walete amici, we'll see each other next time.